Hi, everybody. Charles from GMAT Ninja Tutoring here. So you've heard us talk quite a bit on our channel, on our website, about how to choose the best admissions consultant for your situation. Today, we're going to talk about something related but slightly different. How do you make the most of a few hours with an admissions consultant? Here to help me with that conversation, James Boo, Senior Admissions Consultant here at GMAT Ninja, been with us since 2018. James, give us a quick 2 sentences on who are you and what are you into?
Well, I'm a professional editor, story producer, work on documentary, audio and video, and writing, all that good stuff. I also have a history working in technology. And so helping people with their applications has been kind of the perfect synthesis of like just everything I've ever done to help people with their careers. And I'm happy to be doing it now.
Awesome. All right. So very, very quickly, if you're looking for an admissions consultant, broadly speaking, you have 3 ways to get admissions help. We're going to focus on one of them here. Kind of the industry standard. Most people get kind of these big packages. Most companies focus on those big packages, all inclusive. You might spend $5,000, $10,000, even $20,000. The good news is it includes everything you need, everything, resumes, essays, conversations, mock interviews, all the things included, one price. Great. That's wonderful for a lot of people. But if you're budget limited, or if you don't think you need that much help, you might go in the direction of something like a DIY option, something like Applicant Lab, OnTrack, Magoosh. They teach you what to do. You kind of do it in an automated sort of way. We're kind of somewhere in between. We believe in kind of doing an hourly model just like we do for tutoring. So if you only want an hour or two of help, great. If you want to kind of play it by ear and if you need more help, you'll buy it, great. Today, what we're going to focus on is 3 hours. So if you can afford 3 hours, what can you get out of that 3 hours? James here offers a strategy boot camp for your MBA applications that's 3 hours long. We're going to talk about what do you do in each of those 3 hours. And again, nothing necessarily magical about 3 hours. It's just kind of a good starting point to think about in a limited number of hours of admissions consulting, whether it's with us or another company. How should you think about the process? How do you maximize it? What do you get out of that? So James, let's jump right in. First and foremost, if you're going to do just a limited number of hours, how might you think about that process differently than if you're going to buy a full package? So what should your mindset be going into it?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that a lot because a lot of what I do is helping people shift their mindset about this process, right? The most important thing is you've got a limited amount of time and you do not want to get into the weeds and be completing all the pieces of your application and trying to compress all of that, right, into 3 rounds. Right. Here's my first draft. Okay. Second round. Here's my second draft. All right. Are we done? Or can we do this? It's just not going to work. It's just not how you get value out of consulting time. So instead, we really want to use the consultant's expertise to, especially if you're early in the process, right, to take advantage of flexibility and the freedom of space to make changes and to challenge all your assumptions. And these 3 hours are not all in one go, right? So what we're talking about is kind of 3 key checkpoints that I usually walk people through to kind of help them get the ball rolling. Act more like a doctor, give a diagnosis, give an evaluation, and then give a course of treatment that then they can follow through with on their own. So that can be between the initial sessions, but also well beyond, right? We're really just trying to get you the maximum value for things you truly can't answer by yourself because there's a lot of information out there. So, and there's a lot of things you can do.
Okay, so if somebody signs up and says, "Hey James, I want a 3-hour strategy boot camp from MBA applications," what does hour number one look like? So are you editing essays? What happens?
Yeah, the very first thing is just a conversation. And sometimes it's an hour, sometimes we just end it at 30 minutes. But the conversation asks one question: why are you doing this? And it's so essential, right? There's no point in writing an essay if you yourself, right, can't explain to another human being in 5 to 10 minutes or less, why am I getting this degree? And another way of asking that is even more specific that I end up focusing on is how did you get to this point, right? How did you decide this is what you have to do? And people often kind of have an answer to that, and they don't realize until I'm sitting here on the call asking them to explain, and I'm just like, I don't really understand. Can you explain that a little further? Does that make sense? We start to poke holes in that rationale, and then it is an opportunity. We stop and say, okay, let's reconsider. It's not that you have the wrong life story. It's just more about like, what are we really trying to say, and how does it bring you to the program more specifically of an MBA education?
So James, I mean, it sounds so obvious, right? I think everybody
Mhm.
who's going down this road, they've already gotten out their wallet and said, I want to spend money on admissions consultant. I'm serious. Maybe they've taken the GMAT, GRE, whatever. What do you mean? Explain why I want to get an MBA. I know that walking in the door. I mean, the question sounds so obvious. And I think what you're saying from your years of experience doing it, and again, I've worked doing
Mhm.
admissions consulting since about 2008 too. So I'm with you. Sometimes it's not as clear as it sounds. But I guess, can you explain to somebody watching, like, what goes wrong there? What's typical as far as the things where people go, of course I know I want an MBA, and you
Yeah.
go, no, you don't exactly. So what does that look like in practice?
Yeah. I'll sum it up in kind of two categorical examples. I think there are a couple of personas that you do not want to be when you present yourself to a school. The first is when we say, why are you getting this job? And you essentially are saying some form of, I don't really like my job. I'd rather do something else, to be honest. Time for a change. Um, this is going to be true for so many people. It is true. We're not going to deny that. But that is not a very compelling message to give to a school, right? Why do you want to come to our school? I just don't like what I'm doing. Figure I'd do something different. It doesn't send the strongest signal when instead you could be giving them a much more positive, active vision of what you do want to do as opposed to what you don't want to do. Another example is the category of like, well, MBA is just a great way to become a business leader, an entrepreneur. An MBA program is going to help me learn how to drive impact across teams at the executive level. And you're basically just saying, like, I asked you why you get an MBA, and you said MBAs are good, and I want to get one. But we didn't actually answer the question. So if at any point I can follow up and say, yeah, but why? But why did you want to do that? And what you're telling me is just kind of a description of what an MBA is and does. We have not answered the question. And that's where the real work begins, where we say, look, we got to get to a more personal and concrete answer for what drove you to make this decision, because it is not cheap. And sometimes it's not enough to just say, like, man, Harvard's such a great school, and I would love to have a Harvard degree. That's not the words that come out of people's mouths, but it often is my first task to say, like, hey, just so you know, what you're saying is basically this. And we haven't gotten to the point where you're giving them a more unique version of your own story.
Okay, so sometimes it's a matter of sort of the helping reflect back to the applicant. Here's what this is going to sound like to somebody who isn't inside your head really, and this is something that maybe sounds too generic, or something, or maybe truly is too generic.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you this, James. What does it look like to be completed with that first stage? What does good look like? What's the deliverable that an applicant has when they walk away from that first leg of the journey, that first hour?
There are a couple milestones I can offer that are the same for everybody, but they're very, very strong. Number one is if you can describe a specific moment in your career where you grew into someone who has business leadership potential, right? Or even if you tell me a story about a specific moment where you hit a limit and had a failure or a challenge where you would not have had such a hard time if you had certain skills, right, to meet the challenge. Sometimes those are both the same story, right? But if you can describe that moment of kind of the catalyst for you to make this decision, and it shows real experience and reflection and motivation, that's great. Then we know you're kind of ready to move on. Another way to go about this is kind of from an external perspective, right? If you have a specialization in a certain industry and you can tell me something that's coming down the line for that industry in the business landscape, in the business context, that explains why you have to do this now, right?
Yeah.
What is the opportunity that you're trying to meet, the challenge you're trying to meet, that you see out there that I don't, right? But you do because you're coming from a place of expertise and vision. If you can describe that for me, that's also great. So we often spend a first session, with me not having any of that information. It's not the consultant who gives that to you. It's the consultant, though, who can help spot, well, it's not here. I'm not seeing this come to life. Tell me more about what you do and why you got to this point. And then that's where we get to the answers to move on.
Okay. So hour number two, part two of the journey. What does that look like?
So part one was about where'd you come from? Why are you doing this? Part two is where are you going? And it's honestly the same question, why MBA? But instead we get a little more specific, and it's more about what is it for? What is your, as we say in this business, what's your short-term goal? What's your long-term goal? What are you going to do? Literally, what are you going to do? And, I'll go ahead and say right now, some examples of the things that don't cut it and don't work. The first thing is some form of, well, MBA is a great place to explore my options and just let me in. I'll figure it out. I'm a smart guy. Um,
Which, by the way,
yeah.
James, for people who really feel that way, I'm very deeply sympathetic to that. I think some
Mhm.
people hit a ceiling where they are at work and kind of go, I don't know what happens next, but a business school, an MBA experience seems like a great way to explore it. Absolutely no judgment on that. It's just you can't get in saying that.
Yeah,
To be clear.
and it's very similar to well, MBA will give me a great network. Well, it's like, yes, they know that. They know that. What are you using the network for?
Yep.
What specific network are you trying to build? What impact are you driving it towards? And how are you going to be gainfully employed by the time you graduate? And therefore, our rankings don't go down because you didn't get a job. So there are things like this, right? People will list a billion different jobs, but they don't seem to have anything to do with each other when they answer this question, or they'll name a job that they want to get after graduating that you just can't get. Like, you need more experience for that, or it really doesn't require an MBA skill set. So we kind of, these are examples of things that show that you're not really ready to answer that question, but they're good starting points, because then they help you discuss, well, what is it about the MBA that is going to get me to a specific duty, role, job, and very concrete place after I graduate, instead of kind of just being out there and hoping that I just land on my feet.
So what does kind of completion look like on that second leg? So it's superficially, again, this looks really easy. What job
Mm-hmm.
do you want post MBA? And I think what you're saying is a lot of people really struggle with something that truly makes sense and is truly grounded in who they are and where they want to be. So how do you know that they've kind of completed that step and they're ready for step 3?
Yeah, kind of the hidden linkage of this is it. I think getting to the jobs, a lot of people, to be honest, don't have them. They just can't name the job when I talk to them. But then it's not that hard to go get excited about something you want to do. The hard part is, well, how does the MBA help you get there? Can you explain it? And can you explain it in a way that's just like, again, just rattling off things that are true about the MBA and you could read on any school's website, but they don't really explain to me, Charles, when you get into this program and you tell me you're going to get this job after you graduate, what are you doing here? And a phrase I use a lot is be more literal. It sounds kind of dumb, but it's like, I really need to understand who you're going to be on this campus. And that's the part that a consultant also can't do for you, but we can identify what's missing and then send you forth with some independent work, right? Using very little of my time, but giving you 2 or 3 weeks to go ask the right questions to the right people and get the right information, and then get excited about, what you want to be, what you want to do, what kind of student you're going to become. And hopefully it's a win-win, right? It's painful to have to retool, but it's often very inspiring to get to do that exploration and feel like you have permission to get all that information, and you don't have to just worry about looking cool and kind of saying the right thing.
And one thing I'll throw in here, James, that obviously is kind of underneath everything you do as a consultant, especially with the storytelling background you have. Keep in mind, these poor folks on the admissions committee, they work their butts off. They're seeing hundreds, sometimes thousands of applications over the course of a season. You don't have a lot of time and space to paint a really clear picture for them. So I think a lot of, hearing you talk about all this in this way about what 3 hours does, I'm hearing a lot of this idea implicitly of, well, look, you're trying to convince people of something who have very limited time, very limited bandwidth, have seen a million of these. And you don't just want a vision that makes sense. You want a vision that makes sense immediately to somebody reading about it, which is why it's so important to have that clear from the beginning, I think is what you're suggesting.
Yeah, you really need a foundation that raises 0 questions except, how can I find out more? You don't want any doubts to surface, right? And then hobble the rest of this person's time with your application. You want to have a very strong, clear vision that's structured really well and is not that complicated. And then all the other nuances can follow, right? About who you are. And then every additional detail needs to just make them remember you more and more and more and get excited about making you an offer, right? Bringing you onto the campus.
So astute viewers will notice we haven't talked about writing or editing essays
Mm-hmm.
yet. And that's obviously very deliberate. So what does our number 3 typically look like when you spend 3 hours with an applicant?
Sometimes it just goes back and repeats the first 2, to be perfectly honest, because they're not ready. But when we hopefully will get to is, yes, a chance to start writing. And we're just writing what I call a baseline draft. And there are 2 things about this draft. One is that it can be very rough and doesn't have to feel anywhere close to final or even halfway there. Number 2 is, I often tell people, just don't worry about the word count. Don't try to make it fit, because the best use of my time and a kind of an expert's time is to see what you can do. It's not to see what you currently think a finished thing looks like. And so, writing a really messy long first draft, even if there's like way too much, something that's 4 times the word count, someone who's an expert can actually make quick work of that, and it'll be easier for them to identify, okay, I see what this person needs. Here's what's not working. Here's what's working. And then rather than, again, thinking about compressing all the consulting time into how do I get to a finished application with only this much time? It's more about acknowledging, how do I take advantage of this person's expertise so that every hour I spend on my own from this point on is well spent, is not built on a shaky foundation. So I have people write a baseline draft. I make comments on it so they can take home with them, and we talk about things that maybe aren't so clear because they haven't been asked to do that before in a writing assignment. And hopefully they're building some writing skills along the way. And then with each other step they take, it gets easier and easier. And then they can do things like just ask a really smart friend who's good at writing for help with that other stuff, right? Whereas I can help them with like strategic understanding of like, who is your audience? And like, here's why what you're saying here, the story you're trying to tell doesn't work. Here's why this one does. Keep it in mind. Think about it for the future and go forth and give it your best shot.
So I think what you're suggesting here, James, is that in a limited engagement, a few hours, somebody who's budget limited, whether it's 3 hours, 5 hours, 8 hours, something like that, it's not about we're going to sit down, we're going to write a resume together, we're going to write an essay together, we're going to check the box on whatever it is that needs to happen with recommendations. It's more about giving them a foundation so they can really do all those things on their own or with some input from people in their lives. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's evaluating, diagnosing, getting to the core of your specific challenges and also your specific strengths, right? And then what paths you can take to fill the gap between those two things. So if you are constrained on how much time you can spend with an admissions consultant, like you really don't want to use that time to try to complete deliverables, try to get to the end of any process, try to tackle all the million pieces that are really weighing you down, as stressful as they are. And especially you don't want to really get into the weeds on your essays. The best use of that expertise and limited time is to have a sense of prioritization, right? And you want to take advantage of getting a chance to deal with the really tough real-time conversations that are just messy. They don't give you, they should give you very clear to-dos, right? And insights, but they are going to feel messy. They're going to require you to really question your own ideas. They're going to give you the chance to explore new information, and then have enough space to process all that with someone who knows what they're doing so that you can together get a grip on your foundation and then follow through on building on top of that yourself.
All right, James, thank you so much for doing this with us. For anybody watching this, if you really like James, the way he thinks about it, you know where to find him, gmatninja.com. Sign up for 1 hour, sign up for 3 hours, whatever works for you. No packages here other than that 3 hours, just to kind of give you something that's concrete to get a feel for what you get out of a certain number of hours, but no limits here, no minimums, nothing like that. Now, if you just want recommendations for other admissions consultants, please also hit us up, gmatninja.com. We are more than happy to send you a list of our favorites, bunch of other companies. We want to make sure you find the right fit for you, whether it's our company or another one. Happy either way. So please don't be shy. I've got a little request form. We will put that into the video description as well. All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching. If you have more questions, hit us up in the comments. If you've got ideas for future videos, happy to provide those as well. Thanks so much, everybody.